So I think there are quite a few friends who want to make an observation. So could I suggest that we have observations perhaps from 2 and 4, if people make their individual observations, and then we can respond, and then we do the same, because otherwise we'll run out of time, and we really want to give you time to have your say. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Maria. I'm a Youth for Climate delegate. Nice to see you again, Mr. President. Actually, I have a question for you, and afterwards for the Indigenous leaders if they want to respond. So I'm coming from Romania, a developing country from Europe, but I'm residing in the developed country, and both of them do not want to assume that the Indigenous people's problems are their problems as well. They are trying to dust it off as it's Indigenous people should deal with their own issues, it's Indigenous communities. And we are trying to advocate, to make them understand that this is a global issue, everyone's issue, and everyone should contribute. How will you ensure, after COP26 is finished, that we will continue to spark dialogues at European level and beyond, and we can convince all states to talk about this problem and assume and understand that it's their problem as well? So that's a question for you, and the question for the Indigenous leaders is, how can we best advocate for your behalf, on your behalf, as people who never had contact with the Indigenous peoples and communities? Thank you very much.
Of course, Article 135 that established the platform of the Paris decision maybe has a more important element at the beginning, before it starts to talk about a platform for exchange of best practices. It says, recognizing the urgent need to strengthen the knowledge and practices, methods, and innovations of Indigenous peoples. And that can only happen on the ground, as my colleagues have mentioned. I have a specific question regarding this, is it 1.8 million? Billion that has been committed to support Indigenous peoples to do just that. And I agree that we are already making those steps to ensure our resiliency, our survival. That's our sacred obligation to our future generations to do that. And many of us have prophecies that date back since time immemorial to talking about what's going to happen. And so we are working with each other to ensure that resiliency, adaptation, exchange of knowledge, methods, seeds, etc. I'm from the desert myself, my own nation. But my question reflects on also what was presented by the representative of the North America region. It's a specific question. Is this new fund going to be, number one, available to Indigenous peoples from all regions that share the same struggles, no matter whether we're living in so-called developed or so-called developing countries? And will it be managed and advised directly by Indigenous peoples with funding directly for Indigenous peoples to support these efforts on the ground in our communities, in our peoples, in our nations and homelands, understanding that we're going to do it anyway, even if the funding isn't available. We have to.
From our friend who's originally from Romania about how are we going to sort of build and ensure that the issues of Indigenous people are taken seriously by governments, and that this is effectively a global issue. Well, as I said, I think one of the things that I will certainly want to do in my presidency here is, very early on, have a sit down and a dialogue, and see how we can try and take some of these discussions forward and elevate the discussion. Now, I'm very keen that as part of our presidency year, we are seen to be proactive on many of these issues. And as I've said to you, I've had dialogues with Indigenous peoples during our presidency so far, and I've been very struck by the fact that there are really a lot of solutions that are on offer, which we should all learn from. So I will give you that pledge that we will raise these issues, and we will find forums to ensure that we debate them at an international level. The second issue was around the fund. So I think we're very happy to share more details in writing, but as I understand, it's a pledge from several donors and parties, so philanthropies, people like the Ford Foundation, the Bezos Earth Fund, Bloomberg, and others. From the information I've got so far, the fund will pay Indigenous peoples and local communities to protect forests. The other thing that's worth saying is that, as I understand, the funding is going to be available via the ODA programs. But what I would like to do is perhaps come back via colleagues here and just perhaps in writing we can explain what this is, because I think it's very important to understand. One thing is to sort of set out a big number, the other is to make sure it does actually get on the ground, which frankly is one of the big issues overall anyway about the finance, is the access, and getting access on the ground that is absolutely key.
My question to you, Mr. President, is how, and your Executive Secretary, is how does one say that governments can't by themselves create change? They have the power to keep polluting industries accountable. They have the means to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples. This is what will solve the climate crisis. This is what we need from COP26. This is what we are looking to do for proper leadership and accountability. You are in a position to influence change, Mr. President, and this is what I would like to see at COP26. Thank you.
Hello, distinguished leaders of the Indigenous people, dear Mr. President. My name is Anja Lipstreu. I'm a researcher from Germany. I was wondering, as the United Nations Human Rights Council has just recently recognized an explicit human right to a safe, clean, healthy and sustainable environment, how do you assess the significance of this resolution upon the negotiations among state actors and the chances of human rights and indigenous rights to be explicitly integrated within the outcome document of this COP? Thank you.
Good day, Mr. President. We met in Antigua when you visited with the CSO groups. I brought a message. We need you to intervene in the destruction of our natural protective systems in favor of economic zones being planned for our small little country. Thank you.
So my name is Braden White, Mohawk Nation from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I'm speaking on behalf of Indigenous youth and asking you, Mr. Presidency, although we really appreciate you opening this space to us, I feel that we deserve a dedicated discussion between yourself and the Indigenous youth. So would you be interested in hosting that space and those discussions between yourself and Indigenous youth? You know?
Good afternoon, Larry Moffat with the Citizen Movement Rise for Climate Belgium, based in Brussels. One of our demands to the European Union is to abandon the EU-Mercosur Free Trade Agreement, which we think will have a very negative effect in terms of increased emissions from unsustainable agriculture and the destruction of the rainforest. My question about the agreement or the announcement of ending deforestation by 2030, what measures are foreseen to ensure compliance? It strains credulity that President Bolsonaro would really respect that commitment, given his total disregard for the welfare of the indigenous people in the Amazon and for the preservation of the rainforest. Thank you.
My name is Sam Schimmel. I come to you from the Bering Sea. We talk a lot about cutting carbon, but I want to make sure that our immediate needs are not ever being overlooked. My community, we aren't able to practice our subsistence because of our changing climate. And I want to make sure that in all discussions, we're also bringing up adaptation and mitigation.
Well, we've sort of out of time really, but let me try and respond very quickly to some of the questions that have been raised. I think some of these questions center around what individual governments are doing or groupings of nations are doing. And my role and the role of the UK presidency, of course, here is to try and build consensus. And you know, it has been sort of the power of persuasion and encouraging individual countries to act, and then pointing to the ones who have come forward with ambition and saying to the others, you must come forward as well. And that is the role that we have been playing, we will continue to play. You will all appreciate that ultimately what, from a UK presidency, I cannot do, and I'm being very frank with you, I cannot force any government to do anything. What I can do is highlight issues and have those conversations, and that's what we have been doing. So what I can promise you is that, obviously over these next 2 weeks, but during the presidency year, we will ensure that some of these issues that you're raising are debated and raised with individual groups of nations. But I also want to be frank with you, because I don't want to sit here and sort of say that from a presidency point of view, all the solutions can be provided by me or indeed the UK presidency. But what we can certainly continue to do is to have that dialogue. I think you raised the issue as well about clean energy, and I am going to be sending one of my officials to the event that you just talked about. And I think the issue on Indigenous youth dialogue, I mean, I think that is something I would like to do. What I can't promise you is whether or not I'm going to find time over the next 10 days. You'll appreciate I've got a pretty packed timetable also with the negotiations. But if I'm not able to, we'll see if we can find some time. If I'm not able to find some time over the next 10 days, what I promise you we will do is have, during the presidency year, a proper event where we actually get the youth together and we have that conversation. And I would just say to you, as part of the Youth and Civil Society Advisory Group, that is what we have also been doing, and I appreciate not everyone will have been involved in that, and it's quite right that all voices are heard. So let me make that commitment as well, that I will ensure that we do have such a dialogue. We'll see what's possible in the next 10 days, but if that's not possible, then certainly very early on in our presidency year. I'll just invite, are there any colleagues here who wants to do any interventions quickly, and then we will have to wrap up, please.
Thank you very much. I think that our brother Ghazali has made a really, really important point, and the analogy of a wide-angle lens in terms of the engagement of Indigenous peoples within the whole of the United Nations. And I say this because too often we will go to an intergovernmental fora like the UNFCCC and engage with state party members that need social learning, political learning, and legal learning as well, because they're unaware that their own government has made important and solemn obligations to promote and respect and recognize the rights of Indigenous peoples. And so we need that wide-angle lens to be held by all parties, all others. Indigenous peoples do hold this wide-angle lens. We engage where we have to and where we see that we're threatened, we're motivated, we're compelled to, largely because of what Fawn has said in terms of not only our not only our rights, but our responsibility to do so. And so I think that if there's something that that you, Mr. President, can do to encourage state party members within the UNFCCC to hear at this particular COP, but also encourage a long-term process by which they educate themselves about the reality and the rights and the role of Indigenous peoples. I think it would be an important exercise that we could all benefit from, not only here within the UNFCCC, but throughout the whole of the United Nations. Thank you.
I'll reflect definitely on one question that was asked about the Human Rights Council resolution that was passed. The very significance of that resolution was actually what went into the preparation of that document. There are hundreds of civil society organizations and Indigenous peoples that contributed to that document and contributed to the advocacy efforts. And that resolution is now actually, it's actually a reflection of humanity, actually, that everyone wants the reflection of human rights and protection of human rights and climate change. Is it going to be considered at COP? Well, let's take a look at the previous publications and statements that the OHCHR has done in relation to climate change and human rights. And let's see how they have been taken into account. Not many. So it is, but it's still important to keep pushing. It's still important to keep trying to convince these states, the parties, of the necessity of human rights and the rights and indigenous peoples in all climate action. Not just Article 6, not just last amendments, but everything. And finally, I just would love to echo the request by indigenous youth into a meeting with the Presidency. I think that is super important because we're not doing it for ourselves. We're doing it for not just the next generation, but the next, at least, hopefully, the next 7 generations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for those interventions. Thank you for your contributions from the floor. Let me promise you that now, of course, over these 2 weeks, but also particularly in the Presidency year, we will ensure that the voices of Indigenous peoples are heard. And I've noted the comments you've made on the fund. We will make sure that more information is disseminated on this as well.